Anyhow, I am happy to announce our speaker today. His name came up last year when everybody was doing virtual, and I kept hearing over and over that Patrick Nelson, he's a great speaker. So we reached out, we wanted to get him on our schedule this year. So we're happy to have him today. He's the CEO at Loyalty Point Leadership. He's going to tell us today about his safety story, but he's an inaugural NFL Tillman Military Scholar and the recipient of the Horatio Alger Military Scholar Award. He holds a BA and an MS in sports management from Minnesota. I didn't detect a Minnesota accent though. Don't people have accents in Minnesota? And an MS in organizational development from Pepperdine University. And following his time in the Army, he worked in the football operations with Minnesota Vikings and as a spokesman for Tee It Up for the Troops nonprofit. He has led leadership development programs for a variety of clients, from Fortune 500 clients to small businesses across a variety of industries. And he was just on an international call right before this presentation. So without further ado, we welcome Patrick Nelson.
Well, thank you very much, Chrissy. That Southern Canada accent will slip out every once in a while, especially if I say sorry or, you guys are about. But it's funny when I was in the military and I thought everybody else talked funny, but they kept telling me I was the one that sounded weird. And after a few years of being away, I finally, talking to people back home, I was like, okay, it's us. We're the ones with the accent. I got it. But I kind of lost that during my time in the service. But thank you, everybody, for being here today. I'd love everybody to hop in the chat window, the chat function right now. Just tell me what town you're in. I'd love to know what part of Southwestern Ohio you are in, if that's where you're at. Maybe you're on a workcation and you're on the beach somewhere with your laptop or your phone open, but hop in. So Franklin, Middletown, thank you very much, everybody, for hopping in there. We're going to use I'm going to ask you to use the chat function a couple different times throughout. So keep that ready, but I appreciate that. Ben's in Westchester and Debbie's in Springboro. Franklin, fantastic. So I'm in Elk River, Minnesota, which is in a suburb of Minneapolis-St. Paul, sort of the last suburb before you reach the country. Blake made it clear he's in Michigan. So welcome. I heard that there's a little rivalry between Michigan and Ohio State. I've heard that mentioned once or twice before. Anyways, it's great to be here. What I'm going to share with you all today really has its origin in my military experience, where I had the honor and the great opportunity to serve with the diverse team of soldiers, people from all different walks of life, representing different nations and races from literally across the world. And it's been those experiences that have landed me here today with all of you. And I want to share one story in particular with you that changed my life forever. On June 8th, 2005, I was operating out of a small forward operating base near the Pakistani border at a place called Fob Shkin. This was the type of place where we were short on everything except the enemy. We faced regular indirect fire attacks and participated in several large battles that saw between 50 to 100 enemy fighters each time. Now, resupply procedures for us were a common part of what we did. Helicopters would come in with different supplies, ammunition, and our platoon was divided into two sections. And so when these resupply helicopters would come in, one of those sections would be designated as the hot gun, which meant they had to stand ready to respond to any type of attack, while the other section was tasked with unloading the supplies from the helicopter. So on this particular morning, on June 8th, 2005, we're getting resupplied with some ammunition by Chinook, the big double rotor helicopter, like you can see in the picture there. Now, my section was the hot gun. So we were supposed to stay back, but the other section had a sergeant leaving to go on R&R. So I was going to go ahead and backfill his position and help them out. So as the helicopter approached, I hopped in a Humvee with my good friend Luke. And right before we drove out to the landing zone, my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez, hopped in the back. Now, he's supposed to be back with our section, so I turned around and I was about to yell at him. But I thought to myself, you know what? I value that kind of work ethic. He wants to come and lift some heavy boxes and help the team out. That is great. I know that our section will be able to manage without him. And so as I was turning back around, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he didn't have his helmet on. And so I had literally opened my mouth, but then I realized, well, I don't have mine on either. It's kind of hard for me to say something if I'm not doing the right thing. So I said nothing. And as the helicopter landed, a group of 10 of us stepped to the side of the aircraft so they could remove the machine gun from the back ramp and we could start unloading it. It was hot. The rotor blades were turning. We couldn't hear each other. But my platoon sergeant handed me a piece of paper with serial numbers to items we were expecting. Basically saying, hey, it's your responsibility to make sure we get these specific items. So I grabbed that piece of paper from him and I turned my back to the group so I could ground guide Luke in the Humvee, get him just a little bit closer to the back of the helicopter. And the next thing I remember, it was bam. And everything went dark. And as I laid on the ground, disoriented and unable to hear, I thought maybe somebody had come up behind me and hit me on the back of the head, playing some type of joke that maybe went too far. But then I looked up and I saw bodies and blood all over the ground. And the helicopter powered down. My hearing quickly came back and I heard that very distinct whistle of an incoming 107 millimeter rocket. I quickly got up and I dove underneath the Humvee for cover as rockets started to impact all around. As I was laying there, I realized it was a rocket that landed next to us that had knocked me down. And as the barrage finally ended, I crawled out from underneath the Humvee and I started making my way back to the soldiers that were still on the ground, really unsure of what I was going to find. And as I was doing that, a Marine yelled from behind me that I'd been hit. Now, up until that point, I hadn't felt any pain, but I turned my head and I looked at the back of my uniform and it was shredded and blood was starting to pour out. And it was at that moment that the pain all of a sudden hit me. The other soldiers quickly triaged those of us that were wounded, loaded us in whatever type of vehicle they could find, and brought us into this small clinic on our base that was ran by an Afghan doctor who treated locals. Now, my wounds were very, very minor compared to everybody else. I was peppered in the back with some shrapnel, some small holes, nothing too serious, but it definitely hurt. And I was quickly bandaged up by my buddy Luke. And I saw Sergeant Michael Kelly, a supply sergeant who is recently attached to our unit, laying on this elevated stretcher off the ground. And the local Afghan doctor who worked in the clinic, all 5 feet in 2 inches of him, he's standing on this red milk crate and he's performing CPR on Michael. And I did a quick lap around the clinic to see who else was hurt. And I came across my platoon sergeant, the one who had just handed me the piece of paper right before the explosion. So he's laying on a stretcher on the outside of the clinic on the ground because the inside was already full with others who were hurt. The femoral artery in his leg was severed along with other severe wounds. And by the time I came back around, it could have been more than 30 or 45 seconds, but they had lowered Michael to the ground and were zipping him up into a body bag. And I made my way into a small room in the back of the clinic where I found my soldier, Emmanuel Hernandez, laying on a table. He was unconscious. His head was bandaged. We were fortunate to have a Special Forces battalion surgeon on our location that day. So I knew he was getting the best care possible. And I could see his chest rise and fall. So I knew that he was breathing. And I just grabbed his hand. And I whispered to him that everything's going to be okay. Medevac helicopters arrived, brought us to forward surgical teams spread throughout the country. I was on a helicopter ride with my platoon sergeant who had by then lost consciousness due to the amount of blood that he lost. But thanks to the quick thinking of the soldiers on the ground for putting a tourniquet on his leg and for the medical staff that treated him, he survived and he kept his leg. The surgical team removed several pieces of shrapnel from my back, but they left a few souvenirs in there that were a little too deep to get out that are still in there to this day. But they stitched me up and bandaged me up and sent me back to the landing zone for another helicopter ride to Bagram Airfield to get some more advanced care. And as I was waiting there, my commander approached to see how I was doing. And I said, I'm going to be just fine. How is Emmanuel? And he told me he's going to be okay. And I just felt such relief, like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. And he turned to walk away and he got about 4 or 5 steps and he turned around. And with tears coming down his cheeks, he said, I'm sorry that I lied. Hernandez didn't make it. And my knees got weak as I hit the ground as my commander embraced me. Emmanuel died because shrapnel from the explosion hit him in the head. He died because I failed to do the right thing, because I did not have the courage to speak up and to say something. And there's been so many days where I thought how simple it would have been if I would have just said, hey, wait, guys, wait, let's go grab our helmets quick. I mean, nothing would have been delayed. It would have taken a matter of moments. Just that morning at breakfast, Emmanuel was telling another soldier how he couldn't wait to get home and start having kids with his wife. And if only I would have just paused for a moment and spoke up, his wife, Jessica, would still have her husband. His mother would still have her son. And Emmanuel would still have his life ahead of him. But guess what? We've done it like that hundreds of times before, and nothing has ever happened. And I know it's such a cliche, but I'm here today to tell you that it absolutely can happen to you. It's that 1 in a million chance. Now, I want you all to hop in the chat because I got a question here for you. I want to know, at one point in your life or another, yes or no, have you ever purchased a lottery ticket, like a Powerball or a Mega Millions ticket? Yes or no? Have you ever bought one of those? I have. I've obviously never won either. So yes, right? I mean, you bought that ticket, and you bought that ticket knowing that the chances of you winning are astronomical, slim to none. But you have this sliver of belief, this very tiny little sliver of belief that maybe, just maybe, it might be you. Well, let me tell you, if you have that attitude towards winning a lottery jackpot, that it can happen to you, I definitely hope you have that attitude towards workplace safety, because the chances of you getting hurt at work are a heck of a lot higher than you winning a lottery jackpot. If you say in an industry where safety is important long enough, you might have some lucky days, but you may not have a lucky career, because sooner or later, whether it's your fault or not, something is going to happen, and we need to be prepared. Now, I beat myself up for a long time after that incident. I tried to drink my problems away. I tried to wash them away with pills. I was addicted to Vicodin and morphine for 5 years. It's a miracle I survived that. And obviously, those only serve as accelerants for challenges I was already facing. But thankfully, I've realized that I can take that story, I can inspire others, and I can influence the future. Now, I'm what I like to call an accidental leader. I definitely did not have the upbringing to be leading soldiers in combat. In fact, the deck was stacked against me before I was born. My mother was single, 19, unemployed, living on government assistance. The statistics showed I was twice as likely to drop out of school, more likely to end up in jail, higher chance of suffering from abuse and neglect. People did not look at me when I was growing up and say, man, that kid right there, he's going to go do some great things someday, natural leader. Now, my mom had 2 more kids with one guy, and we had a few years of stability in our lives. But then she married another guy who had 2 kids of his own and a substance abuse problem. So growing up, I saw drugs in the house. One day I was coming out of school. My mother's getting arrested, put in the back of a cop car. My stepsister committed suicide in rehab. I ran away from home, took my mom to court because I didn't want to live there. For lack of a much better word, it was a crappy childhood. But don't be mistaken, because it definitely could have been worse. And some of you can probably relate to some of those challenges that I faced. I barely graduated high school and stumbled my way into a small community college in West Central Minnesota. Now, I didn't have to have a family that took me on college visits or helped me fill out applications or financial aid forms. I had to do it all myself. And so with no real direction, I started skipping classes that first week. I think it's safe to say, as far as college was concerned, I was headed nowhere pretty fast. But then all of our lives changed that Tuesday morning in September 20 years ago. How many of you remember, again, go to the chat, where you were on September 11th, 2001? You can even tell us where you were if you want. I'm always interested in hearing people's stories. Everybody, if you're old enough to have a functioning memory of that time, you remember where you were. John said he was at work. Debbie as well. I'm sure a lot of people were either at work or at school. Oh, Cece was at the same place they work today. Wow. Fourth floor team meeting, 10th grade Spanish class. Oh, that's amazing. So I was in the third week of my first semester at that community college while Ben was on the phone with a pilot. Wow. Love to hear that story sometime, Ben. So I was at third week, first semester at that community college. And as I watched on TV, like everybody else, I felt those same feelings: helplessness, sorrow, anger. So 2 days after the attacks, I dropped out of college and I joined the Army. Now, I like to joke that that man in the picture you see, that's the man my wife married, because that was about 35 pounds ago. I'm a little softer on the edges these days, but I went on to serve 6 years, 10 months, and 22 days as a paratrooper in the historic 173rd Airborne Brigade based out of Vicenza, Italy. So I went to Iraq for 12 months during the initial invasion. I went to Afghanistan for 12 months, and I loved it all so much. I went to Afghanistan again for 15 months on my last tour. And it was at that point where the Army gave me the opportunity to sort of get off the front line for a little bit. And so they put me on orders to go train new lieutenants in Oklahoma. Now, nothing against lieutenants or the great state of Oklahoma. I had zero desire to do that. I was ready for a new challenge. And so December 2008, I left the Army. And in January 2009, I was sitting in a college classroom with a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids. Now, their biggest worry was, where's the party tonight and who's buying my beer? I was 26 at the time and felt like the old man on campus. The one that everybody's kind of looking at like, what's that old guy doing here? Looking back, 26 is still really, really young. Now, I was studying sport management. I was attending university where the Minnesota Vikings held their annual football training camp. And I was very fortunate to be named the very first ever NFL Pat Tillman Military Scholar. So who here, again, go to the chat. Who here knows who Pat Tillman was? Does anybody remember who Pat Tillman was? I'm sure that many of you have heard the name. Johnson's everyone, right? Hopefully everyone does. Former NFL star, right? Like, so yeah, so Pat Tillman was a former National Football League player who, after 9/11, so let's rewind. 9/11 happens. Patrick Nelson here drops out of community college. Pat Tillman gives up a multi-million-dollar contract in the National Football League to become an Army Ranger. And unfortunately, he was killed by friendly fire in April 2004 in Afghanistan. But so those three things, I'm studying sport management, going to school where the Vikings held training camp, and I get that connection, the NFL Tillman Scholarship. Perfect combination led to my very first job outside the military, as I was hired as a marketing intern at the Vikings training camp. And I will never, ever, ever forget that first day, because the person in charge of all the interns was another intern, a 21-year-old kid with a clipboard. And he's walking around, he's got his clipboard, and he's letting everybody know kind of what their role is going to be for the day. And he gets to me and he says, Patrick, I want you to go ahead and go over there to station 17. And I look at station 17 there, and it's a bounce house. They said, the bounce house? He said, yeah, you're going to watch kids jump in the bounce house today. My jaw almost hit the ground. What? I mean, I didn't know what to say. I was so perplexed by that. I had just got out of the Army. I had a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, all that time leading soldiers in combat. And now I'm relegated to watching kids jump in the bouncy house. I could feel that physiological reaction that my body was having. Like, they had no idea the value that I could add. I started to get a little shaky. My heart rate went up. Like, I wanted to punch that guy in the throat. But thankfully, one of the most important lessons I learned in the military is the importance of being able to manage your reactions and using more thoughtful and learned responses instead. I had a vision of working in professional sports. And if I would have let those internal emotions and feelings manifest into behavior, there was no way that that was going to come true. Now, go into the chat here, yes or no. I got two questions. First one, how many of you have ever been in a similar situation where you've had to fight off that emotionally driven reaction and use a more thought out response instead? Yes or no? How many of you have ever been in a situation, something that's just pushed your buttons and you got to do everything you can to fight it off? So yeses, right? Now, different question. How many of you have ever failed at being able to fight that off? I have many, many times, right? Absolutely. And it's not fun. And you don't feel good about yourself afterwards. Now, there's this great analogy out there called the elephant and the rider. So the elephant, this big, beautiful, majestic animal, represents your reactions or that emotional part of your brain. In the rider, that little tiny person on top, represents your response or the logical thinking part of your brain. Now, if that little person on top has no idea what they're doing, which way is the elephant going to go? Probably whichever way it wants to go. But just imagine if that little person on top knows what they're doing, if they have the skills, the training, the experience, they can keep that elephant on the same exact path where they want to go. So I want to give you all a test here quick. So hopefully you all came prepared for it. Hopefully Christy was able to give you guys a study guide, but don't worry, it's not that hard. All you have to do is pay attention and look at the screen. I'm going to put up a slide. So I'll give you the instructions here in a second, but I want you to say your answers out loud. Now, I'm not going to be able to hear you. I'm not asking you to come up on your camera or off mute, but I want you to actually say the words out loud. Okay, so I can imagine everybody's giving me a north and south nod right now. Okay, so it kind of reads like an eye chart. It's left to right, top to bottom, and you have 15 seconds to complete it. Here are your instructions, and here's the slide. State the color of the words. Okay, stop. Time out. What happened? Go into the chat. Tell me what happened. What did you do? Now, I'd imagine that most people started reading the word, right, Debbie? Exactly, reading the word. Why? Because that's what we're used to doing. That's that conditioned reaction. But you needed to exercise something known as cognitive discipline, which is your ability to inhibit those instinctual, conditioned, and habitual reactions and using a more thought out response instead. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ever received when it comes to being able to train yourself to override those reactions came from a former colleague of mine who used to fly F-16s in the Air Force. One day he asked me, he said, "Hey, Patrick, what do you think one of the first things they teach us in fighter pilot training is when an alarm goes off in the cockpit?" I said, "I have no idea. You push a bunch of buttons and you call Mayday and then you eject?" He said, "The very first thing that they teach us to do is to wind the clock, because you cannot break anything in the aircraft by winding the clock. And it's making your brain take a brief pause and override those instant reactions and help you trigger a more thought out response instead." And so I'm taking that advice, and it's helped me in all facets of my life, professionally, even in my personal life, especially in my marriage. If my wife and I are ever having a disagreement and I want to say something, but I know it's only dumping more fuel on the fire, it's only going to make things worse, I'm literally doing this with my fingers. Now, she knows what I'm doing. She's caught on, but I'm doing this. It's my way of being intentional. Just like you remember stop, drop, and roll, I remember wind the clock. Now, the good news here, we can fail as much as we want. And nothing's going to happen to us. We're going to keep all of our fingers and toes, but you guys are all smart people. You know that the real consequences happen when you go out there and you go back to work. And the challenge is on you to take what I'm talking about and start applying it, not only to help you be more effective leaders, but especially to help those around you be more safe. And so thankfully that day, I was able to manage my reactions when I was told to go work at the bounce house. And I eventually went on to work in football operations with the Minnesota Vikings, my hometown team, my dream job. And my job involved working directly with the players and coaches. Anything they needed off the field, I took care of flights, hotels, catered meals, ticket requests, passed on their fan mail, their pay stubs. Not as glamorous as what one might think. And it didn't take me long to realize that's not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So from there, I ended up working for a small consulting firm as a leadership development consultant that literally took me all over the world. I was very fortunate to work with clients in China, Africa, Europe, all over the States, ranging in size from Fortune 500 companies to small mom and pop shops and everything in between. And last February, I was let go from that job while COVID was still in its infancy. And I cried. I was a sole income earner for my family. My wife and I were 12 months into the adoption journey. 2 weeks prior to being let go from my job, we went through what's known as a failed match. We were matched with a birth mother a couple months previously. Turned out she was scamming us in the agency. And we lost out on $15,000. A lot of money. But what hurt the most was that emotional investment that we had. And so now I lose my job. No idea how I'm going to support my family. COVID's creeping in. Adoption is expensive. And for better or for worse, I just knew that I had to do something. And so I wiped away the tears. An hour later, I went to the Secretary of State website. I registered an LLC and I got back to work. And it has been an absolute grind. Every single person has been impacted by COVID. I am not unique. My runway for this business keeps getting shorter and shorter, but I'm working my tail off to make it happen because this is very meaningful work to me. And for those that might be wondering, after a lot of prayerful consideration, my wife and I did continue on the adoption journey. And last May, we brought home our beautiful daughter, Haven, who has just been such a bright spot in our lives over this last year and a half. And we just love her so much. And she's just so amazing. And actually my wife now, we have our fourth baby on the way, and my wife is pregnant now. She's about 15 weeks. So, and we're hoping to hopefully adopt again in the future. So it's definitely something that is very important for us. Now, the challenges that I faced, despite being very different in appearance to what you're facing, you're not going to get rockets shot at you, I promise. The foundational elements are still the same. A strong safety culture has to be proactive and live the values of safety leadership on a daily basis. So go into the chat. There's going to be yes or no. I want to know, for the next 24 hours, can your company go 100% incident free without any recordable incidents? Yes or no? Yes, right? I mean, absolutely. You have many days with 0 incidents. Research shows 99.some% of all incidents are completely preventable, save those lone acts of God. But preventable incidents still happen. Why? You know them. Complacency, shortcuts, lack of training, lack of supplies, lack of PPE. Now, a yes or no question here. Have you ever at one point in your career been guilty of taking a shortcut, not wearing the proper PPE, being negligent, being complacent, not following the proper procedure when it comes to safety at one point in your career? We've all done it, right? But go back to what I said earlier. You might have some lucky days, but sooner or later, something's going to try to get you. And when it comes to your life, that's not something that I want to gamble with. So what's it going to take to really move the needle on safety for people? Maybe a new piece of PPE or some new OSHA regulation? Probably not. Not in my opinion. It's going to be getting people to start taking safety very personal. And I've been fortunate to help lead some awesome companies in that area by designing and delivering a powerful safety leadership workshop that engages all participants. And they've seen some great results that obviously not just save the company money, more importantly, it's just the right thing to do. And so the genesis of this safety leadership work that I've done began when I was doing some leadership training with Marathon Oil. And so in 2017, they had a really bad year safety-wise. People got hurt, people got killed. And so in January 2018, the CEO called in leaders from all field locations down to their corporate tower in Houston and said, look, we got to figure this thing out. And I helped facilitate this seminar. And I watched as the CEO of this Fortune 500 company got up and started talking about safety. This guy just didn't toe the company line and say what's expected of him because he's the CEO. This guy got up there and he made it very personal. And he told a story and he started crying. And I watched how people in that audience responded to that. So from there, we designed this impactful safety leadership workshop, unlike any that they had ever had. It spoke the language of those in the field that are out there on the day-to-day grind, brought relevant discussions, practical tips, and out-of-your-seat exercises, really around two main pillars of servant leadership and forward-looking accountability. Now, when I was leading troops on combat missions in my last tour in Afghanistan, I used to have to give mission briefings before every time we left the base. Just like your startup meetings or shift change or JSAs, tailgate talks, whatever you call them, I faced a similar challenge, keeping my soldiers engaged because they're hearing that same message every single day. So I knew that I had to get creative and think outside the box. So one thing that I would do, I would start having one of my soldiers lead that briefing. I'd let them know the day before, and then I'd help them that night prepare, set them up for success, and then I'd be standing right next to them when they did it to throw them a lifeline in case they needed help. The other thing I did was I started to tell personal stories around safety. Instead of going through my checklist and saying to make sure you have your helmet and your eye protection and your gloves and blah, 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 blah. Well, here's a very short, powerful story around where maybe somebody wasn't wearing their helmet, something that people can relate to. And so the cornerstone of this workshop is something known as a safety stump speech. It's a brief yet powerful story on why safety matters to you. And it follows this really easy 3-part template. Starts out by communicating what your view is on safety, sharing your personal story or message, and it wraps up by sharing what your commitment is, what we can expect from you going forward. And so this template allowed participants to share powerful stories in a very succinct way. And everything we did in these workshops mapped to one of those 3 spots. Now, most of these people for Marathon Oil that were coming to these workshops were the frontline employees, people who would tell you they're not the most approachable people, pretty intimidating looking. They come in, they put their spit bottle on the table, they cross their arms, they don't want to be there. And this is not their first rodeo when it comes to safety training. And at the beginning of every workshop, I would get up and I'd share my personal safety stump speech. And I'd let everybody know, hey, by the end, each and every one of you is going to get up here where I'm at right now and share your own story in front of each other. And you can imagine just how excited they are, right? Because who does not love being forced to speak in public? Nobody, unless you're like me and you like the sound of your own voice. Nobody wants to have to get up there and do that. But something amazing happens because by the end, many of these people are chomping at the bit to get up there and to share their stories about why safety matters to them. I watched many of these people who can look pretty intimidating shed tears and tell their colleagues that they cared about them. They don't want to see anybody getting hurt. That's powerful stuff. That's relatable to people. And some of the most powerful stump speeches I heard were like 45 seconds to 1 minute long. There's so much power and value in being brief and to the point. Some of you are wishing I was brief right now. Well, I'm sorry. I got an hour. I'm taking the hour. Anyways, I've seen people in organizations, I go in and they say, oh, I love sharing my stories. And they're the ones that get up there and around the 7 or 8 minute mark, they're still sort of talking in circles, saying the same thing 3 different ways. And everybody's mentally checked out. The message is lost. So much value in being succinct and to the point. And that's what that template does. And so we took this 3-hour safety leadership workshop. We rolled it out to every single field level employee at Marathon Oil. And over the last 3 years, there's been a decrease of over 65% in their total incidents. And their total recordable incident rate has gone down from a 0.71 in 2017 to a 0.24 in 2020. And that's all publicly available data in their annual sustainability report. Their 2021 just came out. And I've continued to work with them every single year. And now I mentioned one of the pillars of the workshop is something known as servant leadership, which is basically placing the needs of others above your own. And that doesn't require you to be the boss. Servant leadership impacts your safety culture in a couple of different ways. One, it empowers employees to think creatively and outside the box when it comes to safety, because as technology continues to advance, processes change, and it's those employees who are on the ground who provide the best perspective when it comes to safety. Number two, it enables employees at all levels to feel empowered to stop the job. It never fails when I go into an organization and I start asking about, hey, who here can stop the job or stop the work or whatever you call it? And everybody says, well, anybody can. I said, well, how do they know? We tell them every single day. And then I ask them if they 100% believe that every single person out there would stop the job if they saw an unsafe act or didn't know something. And of course, the answer is no. Not everybody feels empowered to stop the job. We can tell them until we're blue in the face, but that is not enough. And one of the reasons is there's a misconception. Some people think that when you say stop the job, stop the work, you're hitting this big red button and you're shutting everything down. Now, that's very rarely the case. Stopping the job can mean taking a step back, asking a question, getting some clarification, and jumping back into the work. Another reason that I hear is people think that they'll get in trouble for stopping the job. Now, that definitely should not be happening, and is usually not the case. But as humans, we have this perpetuating thought that if we do something wrong or we slow something down, we're going to get in trouble for it. And I'll dive into that a little bit, talking about accountability coming up. So what can we do in addition to reinforcing it by telling them every single day in our meetings? Well, an important part of servant leadership is leading by example. So I want you all to quick look at me. Now, I can't see you, but I want you to look straight here at the screen because I just want to do a quick little get the blood flowing exercise. So put one finger in the air, wherever you're at right now, just one finger in the air. Do what I tell you to do. Simple instruction. Then two, then three. There you go. You should have three fingers above your head. Twirl it around right there. There you go. Good job. All right, now go ahead and put it right there on your chin. What happened? Go into the chat. Tell me what you did. Hold yourself accountable. Don't worry. There's no points off. You can't fail or anything. What did you do? Did anybody go to their cheek, right? Ben, of course you went to your cheek. Why? Because that's what I did. As humans, we tend to mirror the behavior of others around us, for better or for worse. So if we're not doing the right thing, how can we expect others to do the same, right? So just like when it comes to stopping the job, we need to get out there and we need to stop the job to show people, one, it's not hitting the big red button and that it's okay to do so they can mirror the behavior. Now, I had a great example of what a servant leader looks like in action. And it was my former platoon leader on my first deployment to Afghanistan. His name is John Post. So I was a young sergeant at the time with already one combat deployment to Iraq under my belt. John was a young lieutenant, just a few years removed from West Point. But what he lacked in experience, he more than made up for in his leadership behavior. And John is the type of guy, and I've seen him do it. He can sit you down, tell you the 12 different ways you sucked at life, but you leave the conversation with a smile on your face, ready to charge up the proverbial hill for that guy because you knew he had your best interest in mind and he wanted to see you succeed. He's going to be there every single step of the way. And John did this by leading from the front. He's the type of leader that wouldn't order you to do something that he wouldn't do himself. And one of the most simple yet effective ways he did this he'd get his hands dirty with us. He easily could have sat in the air-conditioned tactical operations center doing his paperwork, but he chose to come help us when we had to do things like fill sandbags or string concertina wire or dig fighting positions. And John also empowered us to think creatively and outside the box by encouraging us to make the most of our situation. So we're isolated, austere conditions, surrounded by the enemy. And for myself, he encouraged me to further my education. So after I was wounded, I spent 3 weeks at Bagram Airfield healing up. And I returned back to my soldiers at our forward operating base. But I couldn't go out on any missions. I was still stitched up, bandaged up, still in a lot of pain. I couldn't wear my body armor, but I was able to be out there with my guys. Now, we're living in mud huts in the middle of nowhere, but we got pretty good internet because we're working with the Special Forces and Navy SEALs. And so they got bigger budgets, and so they had a nice little satellite. And so with John's encouragement, I started taking online college classes from a mud hut in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan. But in order to do that, I needed to have a certified proctor so I could take my test, basically, so I didn't cheat. So John paid the money, filled out the trove of necessary paperwork, and became certified. But he took it a huge step forward, and he actually went and got credentialed to teach us college credit level classes to anybody who wanted to do that. And he didn't have to do that. And another thing that John did is he helped foster a culture of what's known as forward-looking accountability, which is really the second pillar of the safety leadership workshop that we would do. And, we oftentimes associate the word accountability with pointing the finger at a person because they did something wrong. But forward-looking accountability is about having the mindset of identifying potential problems, fixing them, and making sure they won't happen again. And I learned a couple hard lessons when it comes to accountability during my time in the military. So I was promoted to the rank of sergeant between my first deployment to Afghanistan, or between my Iraq deployment and my first one to Afghanistan. So we were up in Germany training when I got promoted. And when we got back to Italy, I wanted to go celebrate. My buddies, we all wanted to go out. And so we had a plan. We had a designated driver. We went out, we tore the town up. And coming back that night, we get pulled over. Flashing lights, random Carbonari checkpoint. Carbonari is the Italian police. I'm not worried. We have a DD. Well, it turns out our DD did not have an Italian license. So we get detained by the Carbonari. They call the military police who come pick us up. They wake up our commander and first sergeant to come and get us. And I got hit with what's known as a field grade Article 15. For those that don't know, an Article 15 in the military is non-judicial punishment, and a field grade is the most severe level you can get. So I got 45 days of restriction to base. So I was living in an apartment in the city. I had to move back into the Army barracks. I had 45 days of extra duty, which meant for 45 days straight, I'm working from 5 a.m. to midnight, regardless of whatever day it is. They took a half month's pay for 2 months. And they usually take your rank. But thankfully, my commander went and fought for me, and I was able to keep my rank. But I had a really hard time of understanding why I got into so much trouble. I mean, I wasn't the one driving the car. But that wasn't leadership, and that wasn't the accountability that the military expected from me. And that prepared me for an even more important situation. Summer 2007, I'm sitting up here. Observation post War Height, a small observation post in the mountains of northeast Afghanistan. Now, I was the highest ranking person up there, but that's not what made me a leader. It was my behaviors and actions. There's 14 soldiers up there and I'm in charge, right? And our mission was twofold. So we served overwatch over the valley below, and we had an antenna that served as a retransmission station. So the two bases on each side of the mountain could still communicate. Now, we had no running water, no hot chow, but we loved it up there. And every once in a while, a Chinook helicopter would fly in with a 500-gallon fuel blivet sling loaded underneath, because we had a small 5K generator that we used to keep the batteries and everything charged up. And this helicopter would fly in. And now, again, we're on a mountain. So our landing zone is a flat spot, but it's not level. You can see it behind me in the picture there. And this helicopter would fly in and it'd be hanging from a rope, this 500-gallon fuel blivet. It would gently set it down. My soldiers put a rock in front of it so it wouldn't roll away. The helicopter would unhook the rope, fly away, and go back to their base. We've done it many times, trained for it many times. This was no different, except I happened to be on a radio watch because we all took turns, regardless of our rank, taking a radio shift. And so I'm standing up basically where this picture is taken at the Tactical Operations Center, which is just a fancy word for the tent with the radio. And I watch as the helicopter comes in and hovers overhead. It gently sets the fuel blivet down. My soldiers put a rock in front of it. Helicopter unhooks, flies away, goes home. And just as my guys were about to hook that fuel blivet up to the 6-wheeled Gator vehicle to inch it back up the rest of the mountain, my soldier pulls out the rock. That fuel blivet rolls down the mountain, bursts open. There's no stopping it. And so now I'm going to have to hop on the radio and let them know they need to fly back through this dangerous valley where they shoot RPGs and machine guns, risking your life because we messed up. And if that would have been early on in my military career, I would have hopped on that radio so fast and said, well, so-and-so pulled all the rock from under it. It's his fault, right? Because I didn't do that. You can't put that on me. But that is not leadership, and that's not accountability. Thankfully, because of past leaders that I had, like John Post, I realized that I had to look inside. There were things that I could have done differently in that situation to prevent it from happening again. I could have been down there supervising the operation. Anybody could have been watching the radio. I got to just have a little pre-job planning session, reminding everybody what their role was. And I failed to do that. So I had to hop on the radio and let them know I lost the fuel. It's my fault. Now, I want to share one last story with you all before I get going on the power and the impact that we can have on those around us. So in February of 2019, my wife and I were coming back from church. We're making a right at a stoplight that goes into 2 lanes. And I noticed cars are merging over to the left. There's something blocking traffic ahead. And as I get closer, I see one vehicle with several people standing around it. Looks like it's stalled out or something. As I get closer, I noticed the guys that were outside the car were from the Valvoline Instant Oil Change that was right across the street. And they're pounding on the windows and the driver is slumped over. It's an older gentleman. And there's about 5 or 6 guys out there. And so we just kind of creep by and I, take a look and go through the stoplight. And my wife turns to me, I didn't get very far, and she says, if that was you or my dad, I want you to stop because you know what you're doing. And she was right. So I came back around the block. By then they had busted the back window and gotten the guy out. One guy was doing chest compressions. 5 other guys are standing around with their thumbs up there, you know what. So did what we're trained to do, right? Went up to his head and we started tag teaming CPR, head tilt, chin lift. With all the chest compressions, a bunch of food basically that this guy just ate was coming up and blocking his airway. So I'm having a fish hook like out of his throat, all these nasty pieces of hot dog and everything. I can't really detect a pulse on this guy. He looked like he was dead. I'm still not hearing any sirens. I wonder if anybody even called the ambulance. But out of nowhere, and I mean nowhere, a guy shows up with an AED. This wasn't some guy like that's an off-duty EMT or anything like that. It's a guy in a car that happened to have an AED that stopped. We get it hooked up. Those that haven't been through the training, I'm sure most of you have, it talks you through it, tells you exactly what to do. We get it hooked up, gives them a big old shock, tells us continue CPR. Finally, the ambulance arrives, they take over. I go back to my car, go home. And of course, all I'm thinking about is this guy. And so later that afternoon, I called the non-emergency number in the public safety office, knowing that they probably can't tell me anything, but I have to ask. And they said, well, when we dropped him off at the hospital, he had been 10, 15 minutes without oxygen to his brain. It just wasn't looking very good. Later on that evening, Sunday evening, on a neighborhood Facebook page, people are talking about this event. And somebody said, yeah, that's Carl from the Home Depot. Monday morning, I wake up and I go into Home Depot and I just start asking around, telling them the situation. And they said, yeah, it's not looking so good for Carl. Tuesday morning, I go in, same thing. Wednesday, I go back in, talk to the manager again. Same thing, not looking good for Carl. Thursday, I go in. He said he's sitting up in his hospital bed telling jokes. He had a couple stents put in. The widowmaker artery had a major clog. He had major cardiac arrest. Carl survived. Well, fast forward to June, like 4 months later, and I'm in Home Depot like for the 4th and 5th time that day because I'm not a DIY guy. My wife barely lets me change a light bulb. And I'm in there, and who do you think I run into? Carl. And I go up and I introduce myself, and I said, Carl, the last time I saw you, you were laying in the middle of the road, and I'm fish hooking pieces of hot dog out of your throat. Now, I tell you that story because you can make a difference. I played a very, very small role, but a role that would not have happened if my wife basically didn't stop the job. She had the courage to speak up. Carl was saved because of the guy that had the courage to stop, that had the AED. Now, I like to think that I'm a helpful person, and I'm sure many of you do as well, but that concept is not new. It's actually called the diffusion of responsibility. And studies have shown over and over again, when we are around other people, when we're in groups of people, we're less likely to lend a hand or call out a potential safety issue. Why? Because we think somebody else is going to do it. Now, I just shared a couple ideas on how you can help build a safety culture where employees are engaged and empowered. And hopefully you're feeling pretty inspired and motivated after that. But let me snap back to reality, right? Because some of the bigger challenges you're going to face, you're going to go back to work. The phone's going to start ringing. The emails are going to start pinging, more meetings, more projects, and you get swept back into that routine and you're going to lose that inspiration and motivation that you feel right now. Life's going to get in the way as it always does, and you won't implement. You're really excited today, but tomorrow, slow decrease, a little more. Come next week, it's kind of out the window and you don't know what to do. I'd love to get your feedback. So I have this QR code that you can see on the screen. It's a short 2-question survey because I value your feedback. And one of the questions allows you just leave your name and email address if you want me to send you a white paper I wrote on building a safety culture, 5 ways to build a safety culture. I'm not going to send it to everybody because I don't want to spam you guys. If you want it, great. Leave your name and email and I'll send it to you. All you have to do, for those that may not be familiar with the QR code, you open the camera app on your phone, you point your phone right at the screen. You don't actually take a picture. A little dialog box should open. You click that and it'll take you right to the survey. Can somebody quick just at least hop in the chat and let me know that yes, the QR code worked for them. It worked for me earlier this morning. I just want to double check to make sure that it's working for all of you. I really value your opinion. Thank you very much. Perfect. Thank you all. So again, if you want that white paper, I'm more than happy to send that to you. And also, I'd love to be a resource for y'all going forward. There's my name and email address. I've been to Ohio a lot of times, coming to share my inspirational message, even doing some workshops for some companies that saw me at Safety Councils. If that's something that would interest you, reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn, Patrick Nelson, Loyalty Point Leadership. I'm very, very passionate about what I do and making a difference. And I really thank you all for the opportunity to come in and to share my story with all of you today. So Christy, thank you so much for this chance.
Thank you, Patrick. That was wonderful, entertaining and informative and engaging. And if anybody has any questions, just type them in the chat real quick. Do it quickly because I know we're right at 1 o'clock. It went by fast. Thanks for all your stories you told us, and you have a beautiful family.
Thank you.
Doesn't look like anybody had any questions. And you have his information, so if you have questions, you can always ask him directly. And I thank you for your time. It was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.